Alright, let me get this out of the way first. I never truly loved my wife, Megan. Not in the way you're supposed to when you're planning to spend your whole life with someone. But Megan, well, she was stunning. Gorgeous enough to make anyone look twice. She was smart enough to keep up with a conversation, but honestly, I married her for what she represented. Someone who made me look good at dinners and gatherings. She was that perfect combination of beauty and brains, the kind you show off, but never really connect with deeply. I'll admit it, I was a fool. I went ahead and married her anyway, figuring that it was good enough. 8 years later, things had gotten, well, comfortable. We weren't constantly at each other's throats or anything, but we sure weren't Romeo and Juliet either. We had settled into this sort of rhythm, a routine. Life was predictable, and I thought that was okay. But then, something changed. Megan started paying more attention to her appearance, way more than usual. She'd always been the type to keep up with trends, but this was different. We're talking high-end lingerie, frequent spa days, new clothes, the works. It felt like she was auditioning for some luxury brand, rather than living our regular life. And here's the kicker. It wasn't for me. I knew it wasn't. My gut told me something was off. You ever get that feeling in your gut, like something's just not right? That's where I was. Call it instinct or maybe just common sense catching up to me, but I knew she was sneaking around. I had no proof, just the feeling. So I did what any suspicious husband would do when they don't trust their wife. I hired a private investigator. Yeah, I know, cliché, right? But I needed the truth. And guess what? She was cheating on me. Of course, she was. Megan wasn't just having an affair. She was practically living a second life with her coworker, Brad. The investigator came back with a report that laid it all out, explicitly. Let's just say it wasn't a friendly work relationship. They were all over each other, constantly. The investigator's report detailed everything. The dates, the locations, even the graphic moments I didn't need to read. It was like they couldn't keep their hands off each other. Classy, right? But here's the thing. When I found out, I didn't lose it. I didn't throw things or scream at her. Nah, that's not my style. Instead, I thought, if she thinks she can play me for a fool, I'll make her regret it. I wasn't heartbroken. I had never really loved her in the first place, remember? But I wasn't about to let her get away with it either. No, I was going to mess with her. And Brad on my own terms. I started planning my revenge. First things first, I didn't confront her. Where's the fun in that? I filed for divorce quietly. Megan didn't even notice because she was too busy with her secret little trysts. Then, I took all the money from our joint account and transferred it into my personal one. Let's just say she was too distracted to pay attention to where the cash was going. Now, here's where things get interesting. I'm a bit of a tech nerd, so I rigged up cameras all around our house, bedroom, living room, kitchen, you name it. These weren't just any cameras either. They streamed live footage straight to my phone. I wanted to catch everything as it unfolded. And just for an added touch, I installed a speaker system connected to the cameras. That way, I could speak to them at the perfect moment. It was all about the dramatic flair. If I was going down this road, I was going all the way. I needed my grand finale. So, I told Megan I had a business trip coming up, something that would take me out of town for a week. I made it sound legitimate with talk of investors and meetings. She didn't question it. Little did she know, my business trip was actually a week-long vacation in Miami. I figured I deserved some sun after all this drama. The moment my plane took off, I knew Brad would come slithering over to my house. Megan and Brad must have thought they were geniuses, sneaking around the moment I was out of sight. But what they didn't know was that I was watching everything from my hotel room, cocktail in hand, live streaming their stupidity right to my phone. So there I was, lying on a lounge chair at a beachfront hotel in Miami, sipping on a mojito and watching the live feed from my house. Sure enough, as soon as I was out of sight, Brad wasted no time. I watched him pull up in his car and head straight to my front door like a dog in heat. They didn't even bother to wait for long. Megan let him in, and within minutes, they were all over each other like teenagers sneaking around in their parents' house. I wasn't even mad. Honestly, I felt detached. It was almost like watching a bad movie, predictable and pathetic. But what made it worth it was that I knew they had no idea what was coming. I had a front row seat to their little show, and I was about to give them a performance they'd never forget. I sat up in my hotel bed, turning the volume up a bit to hear what they were saying. Not that it mattered much. They weren't doing a whole lot of talking. I let them have their moment. I figured if Megan was so desperate to play me for a fool, I'd let her think she was getting away with it for a little longer. That's when I decided it was time for round one of my little game. You see, before I left, I had paid a couple of neighborhood kids to play a prank. Nothing too crazy, just some old-fashioned ding-dong ditch. The kids were thrilled, thinking it was just a harmless joke. They had no idea what was really going on inside. I tapped my phone, sending the signal to the kids. Within seconds, they were at my door, ringing the bell and then running off like they'd seen a ghost. From my hotel room, I watched the scene unfold. Megan and Brad jumped apart like they'd been caught by the police. Megan froze, staring at the door, panic written all over her face. Brad, the genius that he is, started fumbling to put his clothes back on. Megan tried to act cool, muttering something about it being a delivery or a neighbor. She walked to the door, opened it cautiously, and looked outside. But, of course, there was no one there. Just an empty porch. I watched her confusion grow as she looked around, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. The look on her face was priceless. I couldn't help but laugh. I mean, really laugh. She stood there, confused and nervous, while Brad awkwardly sat there, trying to look like he hadn't just been caught red-handed. They calmed down after a few minutes. Megan shrugged it off, closing the door and telling Brad it must have been a kid playing a prank. And then, like the idiots they were, they went right back to their little affair, thinking the coast was clear. But I wasn't done. Oh no, that was just the beginning. I had them rattled, no doubt about it. Watching them scramble at the sound of the doorbell was hilarious, but I wasn't done. Not even close. The fun part was just beginning. After they calmed down from the second prank, it was clear they were trying to shake off the tension, acting like everything was fine. Brad and Megan exchanged nervous glances, but soon they convinced themselves it was just some kids messing around. They were desperate to get back to their little secret affair. Idiots. I sat there, watching through the live feed as they moved back to the couch. Brad made some awkward joke to lighten the mood, and Megan laughed, but I could see the unease in her eyes. They didn't know what was coming next. I waited, patient, silent. They got closer again, like moths to a flame, hands roaming, breath quickening. My wife, Megan, completely lost in the moment, her body responding to Brad's touch. They thought they were safe, that the worst was over. But no, I was waiting for something special. I wasn't just going to scare them again. I was going to destroy them. And then I saw it. That moment. Megan's back arched, her eyes closed, her lips parted, and I knew. She was right there. It was perfect. I leaned forward, and with a tap on my phone, I spoke through the speakers I had rigged up. My voice sliced through the room like a knife. Enjoying yourself, Megan? The effect was immediate. They froze. Megan's body stiffened mid-climax, her eyes snapping open, wide with shock. It was like her orgasm had been cut short by a switch, her pleasure turning into sheer terror in an instant. Brad jerked away from her, his face going pale as he looked around the room, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Megan's breath hitched, and she sat up slowly, clutching the blanket to her chest, her eyes wild as she searched the room for the source of my voice. T-Tom? Is that you? She stammered, her voice trembling. She looked like she had seen a ghost. I laughed, low and dark, and spoke again. Oh, don't worry about me. I'm just enjoying the view. Nice work, Brad. Brad's face was a mask of fear and confusion, his hands shaking as he tried to pull his pants back on. He mumbled, "Where is that coming from? What the hell is this?" Megan was still in shock, her mind clearly trying to catch up with the nightmare unfolding around her. She knew it was over, that everything was crashing down right in front of her, but her voice was weak as she whispered, "Tom, how?" "Oh, don't worry, sweetheart," I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "I'm far, far away, but trust me, I see everything. Hope you're enjoying this little vacation, because it's about to end." They sat there, paralyzed with fear. Megan, still frozen in that moment of betrayal, and Brad, looking like he wanted to run but didn't know where to go. It was perfect, exactly how I wanted it. I sat there, comfortably lounging on my hotel bed, watching them lose their minds. Megan, still clutching that blanket like it was some kind of shield, kept pacing the living room, her eyes darting to every corner like she expected me to jump out from the shadows. Meanwhile, Brad was a mess. He kept glancing at Megan, looking like he was about 2 seconds away from bolting out the front door. And that was when I knew I had them exactly where I wanted. But I wasn't about to let the fun end there. Oh no, we were just getting started. I spoke again, this time with a calmness that probably unnerved them even more. You know, Megan, divorce papers are coming tomorrow. I hope you enjoy explaining all this to the lawyers. I paused for a second, letting that sink in before delivering the real blow. Oh, and by the way, all our money? Gone. I moved it this morning. Hope you and Brad enjoy scraping by. Megan stood there, frozen in place. I could see her mind racing, trying to process what I had just said. Her eyes went wide, and for a moment, I thought she might faint. Her lips quivered as if she was about to speak, but no words came out. Brad, on the other hand, looked like someone had just hit him with a brick. He stood there, half-dressed, mouth hanging open, eyes darting between Megan and the door. It was almost like he was debating whether to grab his shoes or make a run for it right then and there. Megan finally found her voice, though it was barely more than a whisper. "Tom, please, we can talk about this." "It isn't what you think," she said, her voice cracking as the reality of the situation began to hit her. But I was done listening to her excuses. I had heard enough. "Oh, Megan," I replied, my voice laced with sarcasm. "This is exactly what I think. You and Brad have been quite the busy couple, huh? Well, the show is over. Have fun explaining this mess to everyone." As I said that, Megan broke down. Tears started streaming down her face, her sobs filling the room as she collapsed onto the couch. She kept muttering things like, "It's not what it looks like, and we can fix this." But we both knew there was no coming back from this. The look on her face was one of pure desperation. A woman who had just realized her perfect little world had come crashing down around her. Brad was frozen, still staring at the door like it was his only lifeline. He wasn't crying. He just looked like he had made the worst decision of his life and was regretting every second of it. But I wasn't done with him yet. "You might want to check your car, Brad," I said casually, like it was just another day. "Just a heads up." Brad blinked, confused. "What? What about my car?" he mumbled, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I watched as he slowly put his shoes back on, each movement deliberate, like he was stalling, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. Megan was still on the couch, sobbing uncontrollably, but Brad? He was already halfway out the door in his mind. I stayed silent, watching him shuffle toward the front door like a man walking to his own execution. He glanced at Megan one last time, probably hoping she'd say something to make it all better, but she was too busy drowning in her own tears. And then, as Brad stepped outside, I saw it. The moment his world crumbled. The camera in the driveway captured it perfectly. His car, his precious little sedan, was completely trashed. The kids I had hired had done a real number on it. Scratched up paint, tires slashed, windows keyed. There wasn't a single panel left untouched. It was like someone had taken a bat to it and then decided to throw in a knife for good measure. Brad stood there, frozen, staring at the destruction. He didn't scream, didn't shout. He just stood there, completely numb, like he couldn't even comprehend what he was seeing. And me? I was back in my hotel room, laughing so hard I had tears in my eyes. Watching Brad's face as he realized just how deep in it was priceless. The look on Brad's face as he stood there, staring at the wreckage of his car, was priceless. He looked like someone had just taken away his last hope. His precious little sedan was done for, and it was clear he had no idea how to react. Megan, still inside, had no clue what was happening yet. She was too busy sobbing on the couch, thinking her life was falling apart. Little did she know it was about to get worse. I watched from the live feed as Brad finally made his way over to the car, his hands running over the deep scratches on the hood, his fingers tracing the mess of slashes where the paint used to be. He crouched down to inspect the tires, all of which were flat as a pancake. It was like he didn't know whether to cry or punch something. Either way, It was the perfect icing on the cake of my little revenge plot. As he stumbled back toward the house, probably to figure out what the hell he should do next, I decided it was time for my final farewell. After all, I couldn't let them off the hook without one last jab. So, I turned on the audio feed again and spoke through the speaker one last time. "Oh, Brad," I said, my voice dripping with amusement. "I see you found your car. Sorry about that. Maybe next time you'll think twice before parking it in my driveway." His head snapped up, eyes wide, scanning the area like he might actually see me standing there. He turned around slowly, taking in the sight of the empty street, the perfectly quiet neighborhood, and the wrecked car that stood as a monument to his bad decisions. It was almost like he thought I could see him, like I was there in the shadows waiting to pounce. Meanwhile, Megan had finally caught on that something was happening outside. Through the camera, I could see her wiping her tears and standing up, cautiously moving toward the door. She opened it slowly, her eyes red and swollen from crying, and stepped out onto the porch. And that is when she saw it. Her eyes went wide, her face turning even paler than before. She gasped, covering her mouth with her hands, as she took in the sight of Brad's trashed car. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen. Then, without even thinking, she turned to Brad, her voice barely more than a whisper. What happened?" she asked, as if Brad somehow had the answer to that. But Brad just shook his head, still in shock himself. He stammered something about kids and vandalism, but he could barely string a sentence together. Megan stood there, shaking, trying to make sense of it all. The panic in her eyes was back, but this time it was worse. This time she realized that everything around her was crumbling faster than she could keep up with. I let them stand there in silence for a minute, the tension hanging thick in the air, before I spoke into the speaker again. "Well, this has been fun, Megan. Divorce papers are on their way, and by the time I get back, you'll be out of my house. As for Brad, well, good luck fixing your car." Megan looked up at the sky, searching for the source of my voice, her eyes wild with fear and disbelief. "Tom, please," she screamed, her voice cracking. "We can fix this, we can talk." But I was done. There was nothing left to say. I had done what I came to do. I had destroyed their little world, piece by piece, and I wasn't sticking around to watch them pick up the pieces. With one final click, I turned off the feed and closed my phone, leaning back into the lounge chair on my hotel balcony. The sun was setting over the Miami skyline, the warm orange glow stretching across the horizon. I sipped my drink, letting the satisfaction of what I had just done wash over me. I knew when I returned home, Megan would be gone, and that chapter of my life would be closed for good. The next morning, I woke up to a notification on my phone. The divorce papers had been served. A smirk crept across my face as I read the confirmation. Megan probably opened that envelope first thing in the morning, still reeling from the events of the previous night. I wondered what must have been going through her mind when she realized I wasn't bluffing, when it hit her that everything I had said was real. I didn't check the cameras that morning. I didn't need to. I knew Megan well enough to guess how she would react. She would call her mom first, probably in tears, trying to explain the mess she'd gotten herself into. Then, she'd frantically text me, trying to bargain, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. Sure enough, my phone started buzzing not long after breakfast. First, a flurry of texts from Megan. Long, desperate ones filled with every excuse in the book. Things like, "Tom, I made a mistake, and we can work this out." There was a voicemail, too, where she cried, saying, "This isn't what it looks like," and "Brad meant nothing to me." Typical. I didn't respond. Why would I? Megan had played her part, and I wasn't interested in hearing her plead for forgiveness that neither of us believed in. The truth was, I didn't care about her sob story. I was over it, over her. She could try to explain herself until she was blue in the face, but I wasn't the same fool who married her all those years ago. That guy was gone. Instead of replying, I turned off my phone and spent the rest of the day soaking in the sun. I took a walk along the beach, listened to the waves, and let the warm breeze clear my head. For the first time in years, I felt free, like a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying had finally been lifted. I stayed in Miami for a few more days, enjoying my vacation without a care in the world. I didn't check my emails, didn't listen to any more voicemails from Megan, and definitely didn't look at any messages from her. I didn't need to. I already knew what they'd say. By the time my flight home came around, I felt like a new man. Whatever bitterness I might have felt was gone. Now, I was just eager to get back and move on with my life. I arrived back at the house early in the morning, feeling surprisingly calm. The driveway was empty, as expected. Brad's wrecked car was long gone, and so was Megan. As I opened the front door, I was greeted by the echo of an empty house. Megan's things were gone. Most of it, anyway. She'd left behind a few random items: a coat, some old shoes she probably forgot in her rush to get out, a photo frame with our wedding picture still in it. I chuckled at that one, pulling the picture out and tossing it into the trash without a second thought. The house felt different, quiet, but not in a bad way. It was peaceful, like the storm had finally passed. I stood there for a minute, taking it all in, before walking over to the fridge and grabbing a beer. I cracked it open, sat down on the couch, the same couch where I had watched everything unfold, and let out a long breath. She was gone. Finally. It was over. I knew people would talk, of course. Word had probably spread around the neighborhood by now. People love to gossip. I could already picture it: whispers at the grocery store, sideways glances from neighbors who'd heard about the divorce, who maybe even knew about Megan and Brad. But honestly, I didn't care. As the days passed, I started hearing bits and pieces about what had happened to Megan and Brad after everything went down. People love to talk, especially when there's juicy drama like this. Turns out, Brad had bailed on Megan not long after the whole mess with the cameras and his destroyed car. Apparently, the pressure was too much for him. I heard through the grapevine that he freaked out, claiming he couldn't handle the situation and that the drama had ruined his life. Funny how things tend to crumble when they're built on lies. From what I gathered, Megan had tried to patch things up with him, but he wasn't having it. I could almost picture the scene: her crying, begging him not to leave, promising they could start fresh, while he made excuses about needing space. The guy probably thought he could slip away from it all, but the damage had already been done. Megan didn't just lose me. She lost Brad too. I guess he figured if this was what happened while they were sneaking around, an actual relationship would be a nightmare. And he was right. People like Megan and Brad, they don't thrive in the light. They need the secrecy, the thrill of getting away with something. Without that, it all falls apart. But that wasn't my problem anymore. As far as I was concerned, they could both go to hell for all I cared. I had made my move, and now I was done with them. Of course, Megan tried to reach out again after Brad dumped her. More texts, a few emails, all ignored. She didn't have the nerve to show up at the house. She knew better than that. I had already served her the divorce papers, and the process was moving along smoothly. There was no point in dragging things out. The messages she sent got more desperate as time went on. She started saying things like, "I still love you, and we can fix this." Classic Megan, always thinking she could talk her way out of anything. But I knew better. Love? She didn't know what that word meant. Not really. If she had, she wouldn't have thrown it away for a fling with Brad. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I'd remember that night, watching her scramble around the house like a panicked child, and the sympathy disappeared. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. In the meantime, I focused on getting my life back on track. It was strange, coming home to an empty house every day, but it was also liberating. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had lost in that marriage, in the lies and the pretense. Now, for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally in control again. I started making changes around the house. Small things at first: new furniture, a fresh coat of paint. But the more I redecorated, the more I realized how much this place had been tied to Megan. It was like everything around me reminded me of her, of the life we pretended to have. So, one day, I made the decision to sell the house. It was time for a fresh start. I listed it, and within a few weeks, I had a buyer. I didn't feel sentimental when I handed over the keys. In fact, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The memories of that place, the lies, the betrayal, they were all tied to that house. And now, I was free. With the house sold, I packed up what little I wanted to keep and started fresh in a new place across town. It was smaller, more my style. No reminders of Megan. No ghosts from the past lurking in the corners. Just me, living life on my own terms for the first time in what felt like forever. The divorce went through without much fuss. Megan didn't fight it. How could she? After everything, she probably knew there wasn't much left to salvage. She tried to reach out a few more times, even sent me a letter apologizing for everything, saying she hoped one day I could forgive her. I didn't bother reading the whole thing. I had already moved on. As for Brad, well, I heard he had packed up and left the city entirely. Guess he figured there wasn't much point in sticking around after his reputation took a nosedive. Good riddance, honestly. He was just a blip on the radar, a minor character in a story that wasn't about him. He'd be forgotten soon enough. And me? I was good. Better than good, actually. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the lies, the fake smiles, the pretending. I started focusing on things I had put on hold for years. Hobbies, friends, myself. It was funny how quickly life got better once the deadweight was gone. One day, a few months after the dust had settled, I found myself sitting at a bar with some old friends. We were laughing, reminiscing about old times, and one of them asked me how I was doing after the whole mess with Megan. They knew the basics, everyone in town did, but not the full story. So, I told them. I laid it all out, the affair, the cameras, the grand finale with Brad's car. As I got to the part about the speaker system and watching them freak out in real time, the entire table erupted in laughter. It felt good, really good, to share the story, to turn what could have been a painful memory into something I could laugh about. One of my friends leaned over, raising his beer, and said, "Man, you handled that like a champ." Not everyone could pull off something like that and walk away laughing. I smiled, clinking my glass against his. "Yeah," I said, taking a sip. "I guess revenge is best served with a little creativity." And that was it. That was the last time I really thought about Megan and Brad. Sure, the story would come up every now and then in conversations, a funny anecdote to share over drinks, but it was in the past. A chapter one had closed. Life had moved on, and so had I. I wasn't bitter, wasn't holding on to any grudges. In fact, I realized that what I had done wasn't about them at all. It was about me. Taking back control, reclaiming my life. And in the end, that was all that mattered. So, to anyone reading this who finds themselves in a similar situation, here's my advice. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Do not waste time on someone who does not deserve you. And if you decide to get even, well, make sure you do it with a little style. It makes the whole thing a lot more fun. And Megan, if you ever read this, thanks for the memories. Do not let the door hit you on the way out.